Ellen Burstyn, a name that resonates through cinema like a prayer whispered in darkness. The woman who didn't just act, but bled truth onto celluloid with such ferocity that audiences forgot they were watching performance at all. With her raw, unvarnished power and the ability to channel pain so pure it felt stolen from our own hearts, she became more than an actress. She became the high priestess of human suffering, transformed into art. From the moment she shattered our souls as Sarah Goldfarb in Requiem for a Dream, mainlining diet pills while descending into madness, to when she showed us faith could coexist with doubt in The Exorcist, Ellen Burstyn didn't just play characters. She excavated the deepest wounds of the human condition and held them up to light. She ignited the screen in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, earning an Oscar that felt less like an award and more like overdue recognition for emotional bloodletting. 6 Academy Award nominations, 2 Emmy Awards, a Tony. The accolades only hint at a legacy built on making audiences feel truths they'd spent lifetimes avoiding. But behind the fearless performances that redefined what actresses over 40 could achieve, behind the feminist icon who fought for equal pay when it could end careers, lived a woman carrying scars that would have destroyed someone without her particular brand of steel. Few ever saw the girl who survived rape at 14, the young mother who buried a son to suicide, the woman whose back was broken on a film set, leaving her in agony that morphs and medication could never fully numb. The actress who discovered her trusted doctor had been secretly assaulting her under anesthesia. Behind those piercing eyes that commanded every frame lay nights of inconsolable grief, chronic pain that made breathing feel like punishment, and wounds that even the greatest roles could never heal. What transformed the woman who epitomized strength on screen into someone who admitted she sometimes couldn't remember why she stayed alive? How did the figure who taught Hollywood that women's stories matter spend decades hiding abuse, addiction, and the exhausting reality of carrying everyone else's pain while drowning in her own? What you're about to witness is not a tale of Hollywood glamour. It's a raw, haunting journey through violation, loss, and the price of turning trauma into art. This is the story of how Ellen Burstyn transformed childhood horror into haunting performances, grief into grace, and somehow kept believing in tomorrow even when today felt like a death sentence. If Ellen Burstyn ever moved you to tears, if her performances ever made you feel less alone in your own pain, leave a like below. Your small gesture is a tribute to the woman who showed us that survival isn't pretty, but it's possible. There's a darkness in Ellen Burstyn's past that she kept hidden for 40 years. A violent assault when she was 14 years old that would echo through every relationship, every role, every moment of trust for the rest of her life. Long before the world would know her as Hollywood's fearless truth-teller, she was Edna Ray Gillooly in Detroit, Michigan, learning that the world could shatter your innocence before you even knew who you were. Ellen was born on December 7, 1932, in the depths of the Great Depression, to parents whose marriage was already a casualty of poverty and rage. Her father, Austin Gillooly, was a violent alcoholic who worked sporadically as a mechanic when he could stay sober long enough. Her mother, Coraine, was a housewife who learned to dodge fists and bottles while trying to shield her children from the worst of it. When Ellen was 2 years old, Austin abandoned the family completely, leaving Coraine to raise 3 children on seamstress wages that barely covered rent. They moved 17 times before Ellen turned 18, each apartment smaller and more desperate than the last. Home was wherever we hadn't been evicted from yet, Ellen would later recall, her voice carrying the exhaustion of a child who learned that stability was something other people had. The constant upheaval meant new schools where Ellen was always the outsider, the girl with patched dresses and shoes held together with tape, the one who ate mayonnaise sandwiches for lunch because there was nothing else. The attack happened in 1946, walking home from school through a Detroit alley she'd taken 100 times before. A stranger grabbed her, hurt her in ways that left both physical and psychological wounds. The man was never caught. Ellen never reported it. She went home, washed the blood off her legs, and told no one for decades. That day, something inside me split in half, she would finally confess at age 54. There was the girl I was before, who believed the world made sense, and the woman I became after, who knew it didn't. The trauma manifested in ways she wouldn't understand for years. The inability to sleep without checking locks obsessively, the panic attacks when men stood too close, the way intimacy always felt like surrender rather than connection. School became her escape, particularly drama class, where she could become someone else, anyone else, except Edna Ray Gillooly with her shameful secret. Teachers noticed her talent, but also her tendency to disappear into characters so completely it worried them. "She doesn't act," one teacher wrote in an evaluation. "She evacuates herself and lets someone else live in her body." By 16, she dropped out of school entirely, convinced that education was a luxury she couldn't afford. She worked as a model, a showgirl, anything that paid, while the trauma metastasized into something she'd carry forever. Her mother, Coraine, overwhelmed and bitter, offered no comfort. "We don't talk about things that can't be fixed," she told Ellen when she finally tried to hint at what had happened. That silence became Ellen's inheritance. The never truly disappeared. It only learned to hide beneath performances, beneath marriages that would fail, beneath the powerful characters she'd inhabit. The girl who was violated at 14 would become the woman who made trauma visible on screen. But first, she had to survive Detroit. At 19, Ellen Burstyn stood in a Detroit burlesque house. Her stage name, Carrie Flynn, painted on a dressing room door that wouldn't lock. Staring at herself in a cracked mirror and wondering if this was all she'd ever be. A body for men to watch while she died inside. The year was 1951, and Ellen had already failed at modeling in Dallas, failed at dance in Chicago, and failed at finding any legitimate acting work that would pay enough to eat. The burlesque circuit paid $60 a week, enough to send $20 home to her mother and still afford a boarding house room where the walls were so thin she could hear every transaction in the rooms beside her. There was no plan B, she would later admit with the exhaustion of someone who'd survived by erasing themselves. Either I found a way to become someone else, or I disappeared completely. Those early years were exercises in humiliation disguised as entertainment. Ellen performed in clubs across the Midwest, Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, places where the stages were sticky with spilled beer and the audiences threw coins that left bruises. She wasn't stripping, she insisted to herself, just dancing in costumes that got smaller as her dignity evaporated. The other girls called her the Virgin, mockingly, because she wouldn't go to the private rooms after shows. One particularly brutal night in Toledo, a drunk man grabbed her ankle mid-performance and wouldn't let go until security beat him unconscious. Ellen finished the number, collected her pay, and vomited in the alley until her ribs ached. Between burlesque gigs, she took any work that came: cigarette girl at nightclubs, artist model for classes where she'd hold poses naked for hours, while art students discussed her body like she wasn't there. Extra work in industrial films about refrigerator safety. I was invisible, she recalled decades later. Not just unknown, invisible, like I was haunting my own life. The rejection from legitimate theaters was constant. Casting directors told her she was too hard-looking, too damaged, like someone who'd seen too much. One particularly cruel audition ended with a director saying, You've got the kind of face that reminds men of their mistakes. Her break from burlesque came through sheer desperation. In 1954, she married William Alexander, a fellow actor she'd known for 6 weeks, not for love, but for the legitimacy of being Mrs. Alexander instead of that dance girl. They moved to New York, where Ellen, now calling herself Ellen McRae, haunted casting calls from dawn until dusk. She slept on other actors' floors, survived on crackers and ketchup soup, took acting classes she couldn't afford by cleaning the studio after hours. Her first real stage role came in 1957, a one-line part in Fair Game that paid $40 a week. She had to borrow shoes for the performance because hers had holes that showed on stage. But fate operates in mysterious ways. Director Joshua Logan saw her in a workshop performance where Ellen forgot half her lines, but improvised with such raw honesty that the audience didn't notice. He cast her in the Broadway-bound play, The Golden Fleece, in 1958. It wasn't a lead role, barely even featured, but it was legitimate theater. Then came the call that changed everything, a supporting role in the film Goodbye Charlie in 1964. She was 32, ancient by Hollywood standards for a newcomer, but resurrection from invisibility had finally begun. The role of Doris Walker in The Last Picture Show wasn't supposed to resurrect Ellen Burstyn's career. She was 40 years old, considered ancient for a comeback, and competing against actresses half her age who hadn't spent decades in burlesque halls and failed marriages. Peter Bogdanovich had already seen 30 actresses for the part, including bigger names with cleaner histories. But when Ellen walked into that audition room in 1970, something in her exhausted eyes matched exactly what he'd imagined. A woman who'd been beautiful once, but now carried her disappointments like stones in her pockets. She had exactly 3 days to prepare, sleeping 2 hours a night, living on black coffee and tranquilizers she'd started taking after her second divorce. Behind the scenes, Ellen was unraveling at a velocity that threatened everything. She'd just emerged from a violent third marriage to actor Neil Nephew, who'd beaten her so badly she'd needed reconstructive dental surgery. Her hands shook constantly from benzodiazepine withdrawal. She'd quit cold turkey when she got the audition, terrified they'd notice her pupils. During the famous pool hall scene where her character seduces a younger man, Ellen was actually having a panic attack, her chest so tight she could barely speak. "I was drowning on dry land," she later confessed. "Every line felt like my last breath." Bogdanovich thought her trembling was brilliant character work. It was actually her body screaming for medication she'd flushed down the toilet. The physical preparation was punishing for a woman already running on fumes. Ellen lost 20 pounds she didn't have, surviving on lettuce and amphetamines that made her heart race so fast she'd have to lie down between takes. She spent hours studying small-town Texas women, recording their voices, copying their defeated shoulder slumps. But the real preparation happened at 3 a.m. in her motel room, where she'd stare at herself in the mirror and excavate every rejection, every failure, every moment she'd felt disposable. "I didn't have to act broken," she revealed years later. "I just had to stop pretending I wasn't." When The Last Picture Show premiered in October 1971, even Ellen's most desperate hopes couldn't have predicted the explosion. The film earned 8 Academy Award nominations, with Ellen nominated for Best Supporting Actress. Critics who'd never noticed her in 15 years of work suddenly couldn't stop writing her name. Pauline Kael called her devastating, while Roger Ebert wrote that she inhabited loneliness like a second skin. Overnight, Ellen Burstyn went from Hollywood's invisible woman to its most compelling revelation. Casting directors who'd rejected her for being too damaged were suddenly calling that damage authenticity. But even at this pinnacle moment, shadows crept in. The success felt borrowed, like she'd stolen someone else's triumph. "I had everything I'd dreamed of," Ellen reflected in a rare moment of vulnerability, "except the ability to believe I deserved any of it." The panic attacks worsened. She'd win awards, then lock herself in hotel bathrooms, convinced everyone would realize she was still just Edna Ray from Detroit, the girl with violent secrets and burlesque shame. She'd achieved the impossible, transformation from nobody to somebody at 40. But the woman who'd been at 14 still believed visibility meant danger, that being seen meant being hurt. By 1974, Ellen Burstyn wasn't just a respected actress, she was Hollywood royalty, commanding $500,000 per film and standing at the apex of a revolution she'd helped ignite for women over 40 in cinema. That year alone saw her dominate with Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, earning $21 million domestically while winning her the Academy Award for Best Actress, and The Exorcist still terrifying audiences worldwide with over $441 million in global receipts. Her net worth had exploded to $15 million, with properties in New York, Connecticut, and Los Angeles. She worked with titans, Martin Scorsese, William Friedkin, Jack Nicholson, Harvey Keitel, directors who now wrote roles specifically for her. The woman who'd once danced in Detroit dives was now the most powerful actress of her generation, demanding and receiving equal pay with male co-stars, a revolutionary act that made her both hero and target. But even at the height of this impossible success, Ellen was self-medicating her way through each day with a precision that would have impressed a pharmacist. During the filming of The Exorcist, the physical demands of playing a mother watching her daughter's possession triggered panic attacks so severe she'd hyperventilate until she passed out. The famous scene where she's thrown across the room wasn't acting. A special effects malfunction genuinely injured her spine, causing permanent damage that would require a lifetime of painkillers. "I had everything except a single day without pain," she would later reveal with characteristic bluntness. "I was winning awards with a back held together by cortisone shots and prayer." The public saw triumph after triumph. Her Actors Studio presidency, making her the first woman to lead the prestigious institution. Her Tony Award for Same Time next year on Broadway. Her production company fighting for women's stories when studios called them unmarketable. But privately, Ellen was consuming Valium like vitamins, Percodan for the back pain, amphetamines to counter the sedatives, creating a chemical cocktail that kept her functional but never present. She'd arrive on sets at 5 a.m. for B12 shots just to achieve baseline energy. Between takes on Providence, she'd retreat to her trailer for heating pad sessions that barely touched the nerve damage spreading down her legs. Working with contemporaries like Al Pacino, Gene Hackman, and Diane Keaton, Ellen became known as the most fearless actress in Hollywood, taking roles others called career, never complaining about conditions, never showing weakness. What they didn't know was that she'd often lock herself in her dressing room, lying on the floor in positions that might briefly relieve the spinal agony. Max von Sydow later revealed, "Ellen would be brilliant on camera, then immediately collapse in pain the second cut was called. We all knew, but nobody talked about it." Success is a demanding mistress who takes payment in flesh. Ellen once told her therapist during this period, "Everyone sees the awards, nobody sees the pill bottles." By 1976, at the absolute peak of her powers, Ellen Burstyn had an Oscar, a Tony, 2 Golden Globes, and the respect of an entire industry. But she also had a medicine cabinet that looked like a pharmacy, a body that betrayed her daily, and the growing certainty that she was killing herself for art. But even at the height of everything, darker storms were gathering that would test whether fame could protect her from the worst kinds of violation. Ellen's first marriage to William Alexander in 1950 had been born of desperation rather than love. a 19-year-old girl fleeing Detroit's burlesque circuit by marrying a man she'd known for 6 weeks who promised her legitimacy in New York's theater world. He was 28, an aspiring actor with more ambition than talent, who saw in Ellen someone he could shape into his vision of a proper wife. Within a year, she was pregnant, trapped in a Brooklyn apartment where William monitored her phone calls and forbade her from auditioning, because mothers don't belong on stage. "I thought I'd found my escape route," Ellen would later reflect with visible bitterness, "but I just traded one cage for another." When their son Jefferson was born in 1952, the marriage was already suffocating. Ellen filed for divorce in 1957, choosing poverty over captivity. The pattern continued with her second husband, director Paul Roberts, whom she married in 1958 after he promised to help her career. Roberts was successful, sophisticated, and initially supportive of her ambitions. But success bred resentment. When Ellen began getting better reviews than his productions, Paul's support curdled into sabotage. He'd schedule his premieres during her callbacks, tell casting directors she was difficult, and once literally tore up a contract she'd signed for a touring production. The marriage dissolved in 1961 when Ellen discovered he'd been having affairs with 3 different actresses he'd promised to help. "He didn't want a partner," she said bitterly. "He wanted an audience who'd never upstage him." Then came Neil Nephew in 1964, the actor who would leave scars both visible and invisible. Their courtship was intoxicating. He was passionate, talented, and understood the business. They married within 3 months, Ellen believing she'd finally found an equal. But Neil's passion had a darker edge. The violence started small, a shoved shoulder during an argument, a gripped wrist that left bruises. By 1968, he was beating her regularly, once breaking her ribs during a fight about her getting better reviews. Love in Hollywood means accepting that your partner might destroy you for succeeding, Ellen once confided to a friend while hiding a black eye under makeup. The divorce in 1972 came after he'd thrown her down a flight of stairs, leaving her hospitalized with a concussion. Between these marriages were relationships that never made headlines but left their own wounds. A director who promised her roles in exchange for intimacy, then cast his new girlfriend instead. An actor who dated her publicly for the press attention while maintaining a secret family. A producer who called her damaged goods when she refused his advances, then blacklisted her from 3 productions. Each relationship taught her that in Hollywood, love was transactional, and she was always paying more than she received. The real tragedy wasn't just the failed marriages, but what they cost her with Jefferson, her son. The constant upheaval, the violent households, the nights she'd send him to friends while she dealt with Neil's rages. All of it created a distance between mother and son that would prove unbridgeable. "I thought I was protecting him by surviving," Ellen admitted years later. But sometimes survival looks like abandonment to a child. Jefferson grew up feeling like a supporting character in his mother's dramatic life, loved but never prioritized. That distance would culminate in the most devastating loss of Ellen's life. But first, she had to learn that sometimes love means letting go of the very thing you're trying to save. In March 1980, while filming a stunt sequence for the CBS film Resurrection, Ellen Burstyn's spine shattered in 3 places when a cable malfunctioned, yanking her backward with such force that she flew 12 feet through the air before slamming into concrete. The diagnosis was devastating. Fractured vertebrae L3, L4, and L5, severe nerve damage, and a prognosis that she might never walk normally again. The production's insurance doctors downplayed the injury, claiming she was exaggerating for a lawsuit, even as Ellen lay in a hospital bed, unable to feel her left leg. "I knew immediately something was broken," she later testified in court. "The pain was so absolute, it felt like death." What followed was 11 months of surgeries, spinal fusions, and the beginning of a relationship with painkillers that would define the next decade of her life. The exact moment of realization came during physical therapy, when her doctor casually mentioned she'd likely need a cane by 60 and a wheelchair by 70. Ellen was 48 at the height of her career, and suddenly facing a future where every movement would be calculated against pain. The Percodan prescribed for recovery became her breakfast. The Valium for muscle spasms became her lunch. The Seconal for sleep became her dinner. Within 6 months, she was taking 30 pills a day just to achieve what she called functional agony. "I wasn't addicted," she insisted to friends who noticed her glassy eyes and slurred speech. "I was surviving." The physical symptoms were merciless and progressive. Sciatic pain shot down her legs like electrical fires. Her left foot developed a permanent drag that she had to consciously lift with each step. Standing for more than 20 minutes caused spasms so severe she'd have to grip walls to stay upright. During the filming of The Ambassador in 1984, she collapsed between takes 7 times, each fall risking further spinal damage. The crew built special furniture for her to lean against while delivering lines. Robert Mitchum later revealed, "Ellen was in such agony she'd cry between takes. But the moment the camera rolled, she transformed it into performance. It was heroic and heartbreaking." The addiction escalated when Ellen discovered that crushed and snorted oxycontin provided faster relief than swallowing pills. By 1985, she was consuming 300 milligrams of opioids daily, enough to kill someone without tolerance. Her assistant found her unconscious in her dressing room 3 times, barely breathing. "I thought about dying constantly," Ellen confessed during an intervention attempt by her son Jefferson. "Not suicide, but wondering if my body would simply decide it had endured enough." The pain management became pain multiplication, withdrawal between doses causing agony worse than the original injury. Recovery came not through medical breakthrough, but through forced detox when Ellen's liver began failing in 1986. The withdrawal nearly killed her. 7 days of seizures, hallucinations, and pain so intense she begged doctors to let her die. She emerged 30 pounds lighter, looking decades older, but finally free from the chemical prison. The permanent effects were undeniable: partial paralysis in her left foot, chronic pain that required daily physical therapy, and a spine so compromised that she couldn't carry groceries without risking further injury. "The accident didn't just break my back," she reflected. "It broke my relationship with my own body. I became a stranger living in a torture device I couldn't escape." The woman who'd transformed pain into art now lived in pain that no performance could transform. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on May 8, 1978, while Ellen was in Los Angeles filming Same Time Next Year. The voice on the other end wasn't crying. It was too shocked for tears. Jefferson, her only child, her 26-year-old son, was gone. He jumped from the roof of his Manhattan apartment building 14 stories straight down, leaving behind a note that said simply, "I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed." Ellen's knees buckled so completely that she fell against the hotel wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to nothing. "I knew before they said the words," she would later say, her voice hollow as an empty room. "A mother knows when her child leaves the world. Something inside you goes dark." Jefferson had been struggling for years with depression that Ellen had tried to fix with therapists, medications, and desperate love that felt more like suffocation. He'd attempted to follow her into acting, but couldn't escape being Ellen Burstyn's son. Every audition shadowed by comparisons he could never win. The last time she'd seen him, 3 weeks earlier at a family dinner. He'd seemed better, talking about a new script he was writing, a girlfriend who understood him. They'd hugged goodbye and he'd whispered, "I love you, Mom, no matter what." She thought it meant reconciliation. It meant farewell. The funeral was a blur of faces and flowers that Ellen would never fully remember. She delivered no eulogy. She couldn't speak without screaming. Standing at his graveside, watching them lower her only child into the ground, she felt something fundamental break inside her, something that no amount of therapy or time would ever repair. "They bury your child, but you carry the grave," she said years later. "Every morning you wake up and remember they didn't." The guilt was consuming. All those years focused on her career while Jefferson needed her, all those violent marriages that traumatized him, all those nights she'd chosen premieres over bedtime stories. What the public never knew was how completely Jefferson's death shattered Ellen's will to continue. She disappeared for 3 months, hiding in her Connecticut home, unable to eat, speak, or stop replaying every moment she'd failed him. She'd wake at 3 a.m., convinced she heard him calling for help, running to his childhood room to find it empty. Friends found her once standing on her own roof, not to jump, but to understand what his last moments felt like, what he saw, what he thought. "I wanted to follow him," she admitted decades later. "Not die necessarily, but stop existing in a world where he didn't." The aftermath was brutal. Ellen developed severe survivor's guilt, convinced she'd killed him with her absence, her ambition, her inability to save him from inheriting her own darkness. She threw herself into work, The Exorcist 2, Providence, anything that would exhaust her enough to sleep without dreams. But at night, when the camera stopped, she'd sit in her car playing Jefferson's favorite songs, talking to him as if he could hear, apologizing for every mistake, every moment she'd chosen career over motherhood. His death changed her fundamentally. The woman who'd survived violence and abandonment finally found the loss she couldn't transform into art. "You can survive anything," she said, "except outliving your child. That's not survival. It's punishment." By 1988, Ellen Burstyn sat atop a fortune worth $25 million, owned 3 properties including a $4 million Manhattan brownstone, and had just launched her own production company focused on women's stories. But what the world didn't know was that her business manager of 15 years, Martin Stern, had been systematically embezzling her wealth, using her accounts like a personal casino while she was mourning Jefferson's death. The discovery came during a routine tax audit when the IRS informed her she owed $3.2 million in back taxes on income that had never reached her accounts. Between 1978 and 1988, Stern had stolen an estimated $18 million, leaving Ellen with properties mortgaged beyond their value and retirement accounts drained to nothing. "I went from wealthy to bankrupt while winning awards," Ellen admitted in court documents. "He knew I was too grief-stricken to check the books." The public humiliation was swift and merciless. Variety ran a headline: "Burstyn broke, Oscar winner files bankruptcy." The same industry that had celebrated her feminist stance now whispered about emotional women who couldn't handle money. Studios that had once begged for her involvement suddenly deemed her too risky, not artistically, but financially. Insurance companies demanded massive bonds for her to work, assuming she was unreliable. "I went from being Ellen Burstyn to being a cautionary tale," she reflected bitterly. "Overnight, I was poison." The roles offered dropped from leading parts to grandmother cameos that paid scale. CBS withdrew a development deal worth $2 million. The actor's studio quietly suggested she step down from leadership. Behind the scenes, the financial hemorrhaging was catastrophic. Ellen was forced to sell her Connecticut estate for $1.8 million, half its market value, to a buyer who knew she was desperate. Her Manhattan brownstone went next, auctioned for $2.3 million to cover tax liens. Her art collection, including a Basquiat and two Rothkos, sold for a fraction of their worth because dealers knew she had no negotiating power. The production company folded, taking with it 5 projects in development and the dreams of telling women's stories without studio interference. "I lost everything Jefferson had been proud of," she wept to her lawyer. "It felt like losing him again." The survival tactics were humiliating for a woman who'd fought for equal pay. Ellen took television commercials in Japan for adult diapers, work she'd once considered beneath her dignity. She accepted dinner theater productions in Florida, performing same time next year to retirees for $3,000 a week. She sold her jewelry, including the sapphire ring Jefferson had given her for her 50th birthday, keeping only her mother's wedding band. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, taking the subway to auditions where casting directors half her age didn't recognize her name. The slow rebuild took a decade. Ellen sued Stern, eventually recovering $4 million after legal fees, a fraction of what he'd stolen. She took any role offered, horror films, Christian movies, infomercial hosting, building her finances back $500 at a time. "Rock bottom at 60 isn't dramatic," she observed with hard-won wisdom. "It's sitting in a welfare office because you're too proud to ask friends for money. It's eating canned soup for dinner while your Oscar collects dust. It's discovering that respect in Hollywood is rental property. The moment you can't pay, you're evicted." By the late 1990s, she'd stabilized, but the woman who'd once commanded $500,000 per role now carefully counted every penny, knowing how quickly fortune could become misfortune. By 2019, Ellen Burstyn's appearance at the Academy Awards became uncomfortable viewing for millions when she struggled to read the teleprompter, squinting through glasses that clearly weren't strong enough, her voice faltering as she lost her place twice during a simple introduction. What the public didn't know was that Ellen had been battling macular degeneration for 5 years, a progressive eye disease that was slowly stealing her ability to see faces, read scripts, or recognize her own reflection. "I'm going blind in slow motion," she admitted to a close friend. "Every morning I wake up with a little less world visible to me." The condition meant she could no longer drive, needed assistance to read her contracts aloud, and had to memorize scripts by listening to recordings because the words on paper had become ghostly blurs. The cognitive changes were equally frightening. During the filming of Pieces of a Woman in 2020, Ellen would forget her character's name mid-scene, stare blankly at actors she'd worked with for weeks as if seeing them for the first time. The crew pretended not to notice when she'd ask the same question 5 times in an hour, or when she'd arrive at set having forgotten they were filming that day. Martha Marcy May Marlene's director later revealed, "Ellen would be brilliant in one take, then completely lost in the next, like someone was switching her consciousness on and off." Tests revealed mild cognitive impairment, likely from decades of pain medication and the trauma of multiple concussions from her 1980 accident. Public mockery followed her every appearance. Her speech at the 2021 SAG Awards, where she rambled for 3 minutes about her dead son instead of presenting the award, went viral as Ellen Burstyn's senior moment. Social media exploded with cruel memes comparing her to dementia patients. Comment sections filled with suggestions she be put in a home or banned from public appearances. The woman who'd revolutionized roles for older actresses was reduced to a punchline about aging. She stopped leaving her apartment for weeks after reading a Twitter thread titled, "Watching Ellen Burstyn Decompose in Real Time," with 89,000 likes. The isolation became crushing. Ellen withdrew from the Actors Studio, claiming scheduling conflicts but really unable to navigate the building she'd led for years. Friends reported she'd become paranoid, convinced people were stealing from her again, hiding money in books and forgetting where she'd put it. She'd call the same friend multiple times a night, not remembering previous conversations, each time more distressed about being alone. Her apartment, once meticulously organized, became cluttered with newspapers she couldn't read, bills she couldn't see to pay, food rotting because she'd forgotten she'd bought it. Recent controversies only deepened her isolation. Her comments about modern feminism being too aggressive sparked backlash from younger actresses who'd once considered her a hero. Her defense of problematic directors from the 1970s was called enabling abuse culture. An interview where she appeared confused about current events and referred to Barack Obama as the current president in 2023 went viral as proof of senility. "I've become the thing every actress fears," Ellen confessed during a lucid moment to her healthcare aide. "Not just old, but irrelevant. Not just forgotten, but embarrassing. I revolutionized how Hollywood saw women over 40, and now I'm proof of why they were right to ignore us." The woman who'd survived everything was finally facing an enemy she couldn't act her way through or transform into art. Today, at 92, Ellen Burstyn lives not as the fierce revolutionary who once transformed Hollywood's treatment of women, but as a woman learning that sometimes the greatest performance is simply continuing to exist when everything inside you has already taken its final bow. From the violated girl in Detroit to the icon who showed us that women's pain deserved the same screen time as men's triumph, her journey reminds us that our pioneers pay prices we never see, that those who break barriers often break themselves in the process, and that perhaps the cruelest fate is living long enough to see yourself forgotten by the revolution you started. She rises each morning in her modest one-bedroom apartment in Queens, the Manhattan brownstone long gone, the awards and storage she can no longer afford, struggling to see the pill bottles lined up on her kitchen counter, taking medications by touch rather than sight. Her daily routine is a negotiation with a body and mind that no longer cooperate, physical therapy for a spine that never healed, audiobooks because reading is impossible, meals delivered because she can't see well enough to cook safely. Her net worth has dwindled to roughly $2 million, enough to cover care, but not comfort. Recent roles in Pieces of a Woman and The Exorcist Believer earned modest paychecks and proved Ellen Burstyn still possesses flashes of brilliance, even if those flashes come between longer stretches of darkness. What brings her peace now are the small mercies most of us take for granted. The voice of her healthcare aide reading her old reviews aloud. Phone calls from the few friends still alive who remember when she was Edna Ray. Listening to recordings of Jefferson's voice that she saved on cassette tapes, even though each playback is both comfort and torture. She finds solace in her Actors Studio lifetime membership, though she can no longer navigate the building, and in knowing that somewhere, film students still study her performance in Requiem for a Dream, without knowing she can no longer watch it herself. The universal message woven through Ellen's story speaks to anyone who has transformed trauma into purpose, who has been punished for their strength, who has discovered that surviving everything doesn't mean you get to keep anything. Sometimes it just means you're the last one standing in the ruins. Her journey tells us that our worth isn't measured in our resilience, but in our willingness to remain human after inhumanity. That our real legacy isn't the barriers we break, but the price we pay to break them. And that sometimes survival itself is the cruelest role of all. To those watching who carry invisible wounds, the survivors who achieve greatly while bleeding quietly, the parents who've buried children and still wake up each morning, the pioneers who open doors for others while being crushed by them, Ellen's story is your story too. You are not alone in feeling like your greatest strength became your greatest tragedy, like your survival is both triumph and punishment. Your pain is valid, your exhaustion is earned, and your continued existence is heroic even when it feels like mere endurance. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us which Ellen Burstyn performance helped you understand your own pain. Leave a like, not just for the actress, but for the woman who showed us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep living when you have every reason not to. Subscribe to hear more stories of icons who remind us that glory and agony often wear the same face. Thank you, Ellen, for showing us that women's stories matter even when they hurt to tell, for proving that age doesn't diminish artistry even when it diminishes everything else, and for teaching us that sometimes the greatest performance is the one where you don't get applause. You just get through another day,